Hello, everyone. The following conversation is about the topic of parental alienation. Chose to do this special podcast episode after a conversation with this dear friend of mine that I went to college for when I was in my undergrad for psychology. And she shared some of her personal life experience. And this is also a very common situation that came up in my work as a crisis counselor. And so I wanted to draw some attention to it to both raise awareness and hopefully lead to some positive change, both on a micro and a macro level. Due to the very sensitive nature of this topic and not loving parents not wanting to bring any additional emotional harm to the children who are already experiencing it and have a mountain of trauma that they're going through already because of being separated from their parents, but also to not put parents themselves in a situation where it's more difficult to fight for their children and advocate for them and to stay in their lives. So for that reason, my friend has chosen to stay anonymous, so we aren't going to name her or show her face. But nonetheless, I want to say very special thanks to her for being willing to share her testimony, as I think it's powerful and speaks to what's become, unfortunately, a very serious social epidemic in our society today. So please watch and listen as we discuss the troubling topic of parental alienation. Okay, so we'll just go for it here. And so first of all, thanks for being willing to do it. What we're kind of focusing in on, and I'll try to introduce this a little bit, and then you can tell me what you think about it and then go from there. So basically, we had talked in the past about alienating behavior from parents and how sometimes a parent can be tempted to paint the other parent in a negative light and even take sometimes extreme measures to basically try and erase that parent from the child's life or disparage them to the point where the child really looks at that other parent negatively and that it fractures the relationship and causes harm to the child in that way from alienating them from their parent. I think you were also careful to emphasize that there's been some research or evidence that it's not necessarily like a syndrome, but it's a common tactic, at least, that is used. And I would add in that out of spite, oftentimes by one parent, if there's a break in the relationship, that then the children can get put in the middle as a way to kind of get back at the other parent. So let me know if there's anything you want to add or subtract from that, first of all, and then just any thoughts either that you have about it, and then if you want to get into any of your own personal history from it. And then the last thing I'll say before I let you get going is that we wanted to do this anonymously because one of the really difficult things about if someone is experiencing parental alienation is it's hard to talk about because you don't want to, as a parent that really cares about your children's well-being, cause any further harm to them by talking about it publicly. But yet it is a really important topic because many families go through it.
That's correct. That's correct. It is research that I've read agrees that it is a form of abuse to the child as well as the other parent. And we all have to keep in mind and remember that that child came from both parents. And from my own experience, at one point my child said to me, I came from both of you, so you guys hate each other so much. Do you hate me?
Mm.
And of course that's not the case. And I had even went as far as to try to reassure her that I would go through everything that I had endured all over again just to have her. I would do it 100 times over because it was a bad situation. But yeah, It's hard. And how do you prevent it?
Hmm. Okay. What has, and I want to emphasize one more thing that I actually, I think the first time that I met you was when I was, and I'll just leave this general, but when I was going to school, and I was studying psychology at the time. And
Hmm.
so we've had a couple conversations just with regard to mental health and, broadly speaking, but then specific to this because of what you've gone through. Maybe a good place to start too would be, you know, I, from talking with you, I think that you agree with this, that, ideally, um, and I would assume, maybe that's a wrong assumption to make, but um, that there's a general understanding that the ideal is that a child has both parents in their life, that God designed children to grow up with both a mom and a dad because they each have something different and equally important to offer. And I've thought, if you have one parent who's advocating for both parents to be involved in the child's life, and then the other one is actively trying to cut one of the other parent out, that you should probably assume that the one that's advocating for both parents to be in the child's life and to retain balance is likely the one that has the child's
Best
best
interest.
interests right
Mhm.
at heart. And that, when you start to see signs of, now one thing you mentioned is that you were even in a relationship that, as you said, was abusive in some way, and you can elaborate on that or not, but even in that situation, you, being on the receiving end of that, were still wanting to retain balance in your daughter's life and not put her in the middle of having to like pick sides or think that her dad was, fundamentally broken in some way and that she shouldn't be with him. And but that's not what you were getting in return, basically.
Right. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think? To me, just the obvious answer to that is it kind of comes down to a fight over the narrative, right?
Hmm.
That there starts to be a fight over, okay, what's the story that we want them to hear? And what do you think would be the motivation for someone wanting to tell a story where the other parent is that that they would want to cut the other parent out of the child's life?
To hurt me.
Right.
That the ultimate goal is to hurt the other parent, but the child is collateral damage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, like I said, it's two different forms of abuse. It's still spousal abuse, and then it's child abuse at the same time, but it's it's emotional and mental and psychological, which is according to courts and that it's awfully difficult to prove. And
Right.
that's where it becomes a real problem, because I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but over the course of the last several decades, how much angrier and society as a whole has become. And I mean that's getting a little off topic, I suppose, but I mean, we I think there's certain things that need to be brought to attention, regarding, like, when there's a divorce and there's children involved. Lawyers don't have psychological experience, and when you can't prove something with black and blue marks or whatever, it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Hmm. Yeah, there are definitely all different kinds of abuse, and sometimes that can just come in the form of reputation savaging or gossiping about the other parent. And that can and maybe getting back to what you're talking about with like divorce court is, ever since no fault divorce was put in place, and maybe even just in general, it's a situation where, as you said, everyone's represented by attorney. So mom and dad have an attorney, separate one representing them, and then the child is assigned a guardian ad litem, and that's also an attorney that is supposed to represent the child's interests. But what it can degenerate into is everybody's just trying to get whatever slices of information they can to win for their side. And when in what's supposed to be a family situation, inherently that's not serving the family. If everybody's just trying to win, it should be trying to do what's best for the child. And one thought, that I was just having as you were talking is, ideally, you in that situation, you'd want to be looking at it through the eyes of the child as they're maybe a young adult looking back, and could they be proud of how everybody handled themselves going through the court proceedings and feeling like everything was done with their best interests at heart. And let's say even there's a parent who is struggling for whatever reason, is the court providing a way back for that parent and trying to foster reconciliation and strengthen the bond between both parents and the child or children? Or is it a situation where it's like, oh, one wins and that's that,
Right. And I mean, like for in my situation, I mean, we have been to court how many times? And this last time, even though I had consulted with a domestic violence attorney, who was unable to be there for me at the time, but she said, don't bother with mediation. You've been there 4 or 5 times. It doesn't work. The judge ordered it again, despite me even saying that in court. There are certain personalities that you're going to get nowhere. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. And when you're dealing with children, time is of the essence.
Right. Yeah, well, that's another thing too, is, schedule one hearing and then the next one's a couple months down the road, and then another one a couple months down the road, and then, just precious moments and memories are just drifting by and being wasted. When you were talking about mediation, did you mean that maybe one parent just isn't even interested in having the conversation, or what exactly did you mean by that?
What I mean was with with certain types of personalities, certain personalities tell the mediators or the courts or whatever what they want to hear, and they're very good at what I'm going to call manipulation. And it's a spinning of wheels. And it's just flat out a big old waste of time and money, and time more so than the money even, and usually there's one side that is more, how should I say it, financially stable than the other. And and that's kind of like a strategy thing too, whereas let's, oh gosh, I don't want to get too personal here. But
One question there.
yeah,
Were you able to have legal representation going through family court the whole way through, or not?
no, I couldn't afford it.
So that's one point that
the last few years I represented myself, and he had one of the best attorneys out there.
I've heard it described that going through a contentious family court battle is on par with having a terminal case of cancer.
Pretty much.
Yeah, because you're talking about your your bond with your child. And if you're a loving, caring parent, that's everything to you. And again, with when the years, months and years and the memories just drift by, that is,
It's
it's
devastating.
crippling. Yeah.
Hmm.
And what I think a lot of people maybe don't understand is, unlike criminal court, where if you can't afford an attorney,
One
you
is
can
perfect for you.
exactly, you can get a court-appointed attorney or a public defender and still be able to represent yourself. But in family court, it's just like tough luck, no representation, have at it. And then many parents are stuck trying to put together, exhibits and evidence and trying to defend themselves when they've got full-time lives, and maybe then also are cut off from support that comes with having placement of a child, I think is another important point.
Correct.
And maybe in some situations, even paying child support on top of it while you're trying to manage your own life. But
Correct.
yeah, yeah.
It's a losing battle. And I mean, the alienated parent loses out for sure, but that child does too. And that's what's even more. Parents, we're the grown-ups. We're the ones that our lives have already been, established or whatever, but what 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 is being done to that child without having that contact with both parents. um and I'm not saying there aren't situations where there shouldn't be contact with a certain parent, depending on uh the history of what's happened when it comes to, be it uh, really horrible cases of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
um
Well, yeah,
but
and as long as we're on that, well, go ahead and finish your thought, first of all.
I kind of lost it a little bit there, so
Okay.
let's move on.
Well, one point that is a tricky one, right? Because, and I'll step back and just say that, in the Bible, it talks about um, God allowing divorce in situations of sexual unfaithfulness or complete abandonment. And I think one of the trickier areas can be in situations of abuse. There's, like we were talking about earlier, there's all different definitions or kinds of abuse. There can be physical violence, and there can be by either parent forms of emotional abuse or gaslighting or manipulation or isolation. And so first of all, it's hard to even know where to draw the line there on when you should try and mend that relationship in and of itself. But then let's say you have a situation where a child has been exposed to whatever kind of abuse, and now they as an adult have learned bad habits or have that weirdness inside of them that they're trying to cope with. And how do we stop the cycle? That's one that I've struggled with a lot is, I think that as long as a parent is showing willingness to try and heal and acknowledging that there's maybe something that they need help with, then there should always be a pathway back, right?
Right. There's always room for improvement
Mhm.
for all of us, because none of us, we're all sinful. We're all imperfect beings. There's always room for improvement. But there are a select few people out there that feel that they don't need any improvement.
Mhm. Right,
Everybody else does.
right. Did you have to go through and do any like court ordered assessments or anything like that with your situation?
No, I wanted to, but I couldn't afford it. If I had requested it, I was told that we both have to do it.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if that is varies from county to county. Um, but I was told it was like highly expensive and it was out of my reach of what I could afford.
Right.
So, but I did inquire about it.
I mean, that's another tricky part too, is, yeah, just the assessment. First of all, finding representation is, I mean, and I don't know if people realize, but like to retain an attorney, well, can you give any examples of ballpark range of how much you were quoted to retain an attorney, even for a hearing or maybe for the
Just,
case?
just a retainer. One of the cheapest ones I found was $2,500,
And as
and
my
that does
understanding,
not
that
get
is
you
the
very
low.
far.
Right, right.
That's
That
low, yes.
essentially, that's low and gets you through maybe a hearing or two. And then there's, oftentimes they'll charge upwards of like 250, 275, 300 per hour, and everything that happens communication wise or email wise or communicating with the other party is all clocked in, and letter correspondence and talking with
That's
assistants. I mean, the clock is just constantly ticking.
that's correct. I mean, my my divorce alone um cost $16,000 in attorney's fees. That's just the divorce.
Right.
So yeah, it
So then on top of all that, paying for also the guardian ad litem or the child's attorney, and then any assessments that are ordered through the process, is thousands and thousands of dollars on top of that. And if
correct.
you're doing this even for a couple months, I mean, it can drain all of your resources, and then it's a choice of, well, um, now do I just have to wait until I have representation, or do I try to keep pushing? And then, I mean, in your situation, how many years has it been going on?
Um, my divorce was final 10 years ago in October,
Okay.
but the animosity continues.
Over that entire decade span, have you been in and out of divorce court for placement?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
The last time was last summer,
Wow.
and yeah, I lost count on how much this has all cost, and like I said, since uh for the last 6 years, I've represented myself because I couldn't afford attorneys anymore.
Hmm. Have you felt like you've been able to make any progress in court, or does it feel like you're just running on a treadmill?
Mostly running on a treadmill, and even though I've had lots of valid points and everything, it seems like a the court system is kind of like big business in a game, because if he can afford the high price attorney, they tend to lean towards that, in favor of that. I don't know why, even though I had complete documentation of everything.
Hmm.
And it just felt like it was a setup, because he had the attorney and I didn't.
Right. What have been, the most heartbreaking aspects of this as far as your relationship with your daughter going through this?
What has been some of the hardest points? There's been a lot that she has had to go through this last year, even though the last few months were reconnecting, but I was not allowed to be a part of it. Um,
Right.
and,
Important
and
events in her life, you're just cut out of it.
yeah, and uh, and I think that some of these events have been extremely traumatic events for her. And had we been able to have the close knit relationship that we used to have, um, I might have been able to guide her through some of these traumatic events and
Just going
guide
to
her.
say, I imagine that's got to be absolutely heartbreaking knowing that the specific issues that she's maybe dealing with are the issues that you as her mom are there to help with.
Right. Right. I mean, I don't know how to say what I want to say without giving out too much personal information on her end. But there was a very, very traumatic event which led to a court system, a hearing over it, where she was violated. And if I had the knowledge that this investigation was going on and there was going to be court hearings and stuff, I would have tried to get her into the type of therapy that she needed. She is in therapy and has been, and that was one demand that I had from the time of our divorce, that she see a therapist, and that is to continue until she's 18. But since she has been in her father's care, he has canceled numerous of her appointments, and there's not much I can do about it. And especially with her going through this trauma, it infuriates me.
Right.
Because she needs it now more than ever. And
What do you
even her
think?
therapist has told me that she can't specialize in this specific type of trauma, and has guided us as to where to go. I haven't been able to get her there yet, but I'm still working with it because this is a trauma that's going to stay with her for quite some time.
Right. So you're just having to watch from the sidelines when you know that you could help. And also, something that I think just popped out there too is maybe she's not seeing you as someone who can help. So it's not just that you're not physically there to be there to help with a very difficult situation. It's also that the trust has been intentionally broken down, so that she doesn't even though you are available and present, or at least available for her to reach out, that she's not, because of the alienating that's been going on.
Correct.
Right.
Yep. And that being another thing is, we still have joint custody, and I should have been included in the investigation and police reports and all of this stuff, and that was all kept from me. I did not know about it until three days before there was a hearing.
Wow. So in family court, I use quotes with family court because it's divorce court's the better name.
Right.
That they, and I know that there's reason for this in extreme situations where, let's say, one of the parents is violent, highly violent, and so they want to, I believe at age 14, make it so that the children can choose which parent they stay with, that they put that decision on them. And that's such a tricky thing because, like you were saying earlier, the adults should be the ones making the adult decisions. And anytime you're putting a child in the position of having to make adult decisions, I think there could be a strong case of arguing that that is child abuse. And then, especially in a situation where they're having to choose between the two halves of their heart, which that's an impossible decision for a child to have to make. I think that's, a really, really overlooked part of it too. So, and also, last thing along those lines before I just kind of open it back up to you is, like, the child maybe can be fighting themselves as well, because it's ideally any child would want to have a together home, but then, and so it's hard to have to go and travel back and forth between parents. And so you're kind of battling that too, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That one, especially about a parent playing on that in a manipulative way of like, oh yeah, the court's made it up to you. You can choose where you go, and then intentionally making the other parent seem crazy or dangerous.
Exactly. And that happens all too often.
Right. And I think that it's I can see why a lot of parents would lose hope because first of all, there are some memories that are just lost forever. And if you dwell on that, I imagine it could drive you batty,
It's devastating. Yeah.
right? Whether that's a little child or more of what you were talking about, those big monumental memories like, prom dances or whatever it might be that you just don't get those memories back.
No, you don't.
So what have you learned to keep you going? What does keep you going?
I I threw myself into work. I changed jobs because I was working in the school systems, and between what I was dealing with my home life, and I I loved special ed, the cross cat. I loved that, but I was moved into um, more of what they call EBD, emotionally behaviorally disruptive, and I couldn't find respite. It was overwhelming because I didn't have a break from all the trauma that I'd see day in and day out, and then come home and deal with everything. So I left what I was doing and went to a job that I didn't have to have an emotional um, investment in.
Yeah, that's a really big, another kind of hidden side effect is like maybe you've dedicated your life to helping people in some way or whatever type of work you're in. And now it also, on top of having thousands of dollars in attorney fees and assessment fees and whatever else, it
Now
also,
I have school loans on top of that.
yeah, school loans. And then so the thing you even went to school for, it's affecting your ability to be effective in that job. And so now for your own survival's sake, and also kind of what you were alluding to of just not being able to be as effective because of everything that you're being forced through,
Hmm.
you have to completely switch career paths because of it. I mean, it's
Yeah. Between the two, it would have I would have found an early grave
mm,
because there's only so much a body and a person and a mind can take.
right. Let's talk about that early grave part for a bit. When I was working in crisis, responding to people presenting with suicidal and homicidal ideations, the biggest recurring theme, other than trans ideology that's taken over our society, was, and I would say the biggest theme that kept running through was family court issues. Children who were driven to the edge because they were isolated from their mom or their dad that they love, and they weren't getting to see them for months or years at a time, or have them completely cut out, as well as then responding to parents who are at their wits' end. And I also had a friend who took their life because they lost hope that, or maybe in the moment were just too overwhelmed with what was going on with the awful chapter of their life that they found themselves in, that it was too much. The more I studied suicide, the more it almost seemed to be less as something that people consciously choose and more something that just kind of happens to you. You get flooded
Mm-hmm.
with so much cortisol and adrenaline. The feel bad chemicals in our bodies are designed to be markers to change something and to kind of shift paths.
Mm-hmm.
But in these types of situations where you're trapped in this awful situation and there's nothing that you can do to get out of it for long periods of time, you're just drowning in all those feel bad chemicals, and it can just take over someone, and they run into situations of self-medicating or self-harming or
Mm-hmm.
even taking their own life. And even those coping mechanisms that are not suicidal, then the snowball effect is that those can be used to say, oh, see, look at that person, they're unstable and they're crazy. It's like a catch-22, right? Of like, no, you don't understand. I'm feeling this way because of what I'm going through and being separated from my child. And if I had my child back, I wouldn't be feeling this way. And same for the child. Like, I'm manifesting these behaviors because I'm separated from my parent, and yet that can be used against the other parent, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think in these situations that um, due diligence is done, but be it um, the courts, if you're in a court thing, or therapists. I mean, I've went round and round with my daughter's therapist sometimes too, because I feel like she's supposed to be my daughter's therapist, and so she's not supposed to how choose like one side or the other,
Right.
but it has on a number of occasions she has either, it seems like, reiterated that something that he had said, or flat out taken his side on certain things that
Mm,
I thought were wrong.
right. Rather
um
than being a safe place to um, get feelings out and sort of sort through those feelings, it can turn into a giving advice or choosing sides kind of a situation, or reinforcing, maybe not even confronting automatic negative thought patterns that might be developing, but just like blindly going with it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
yeah, yeah, it's sort of it just on a number of occasions, and when things were getting really bad and when I could really tell that the alienation was taking a very bad turn, um her therapist had said something to me which put me over the edge, and that's when I decided, between the stress of everything, I checked myself into the hospital. I was not suicidal, but I can tell you I was to the point where I can understand people when they get to that point.
Right.
And that scared me. That's why I was like, I need to go to the hospital. I need, because this is a very scary place to be.
So not necessarily I'm having suicidal thoughts, but the pain is so overwhelming that it just feels like the pain's so bad I should be in a hospital, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yep. I think that's common.
And I
Want
mean,
something to help.
right, exactly. And it's not that I necessarily wanted medication. I needed some of the madness to stop, and somebody to tell me that I'm not imagining this.
Like a flight response almost. And
Yeah, right. Yeah.
um, I think one thing to interject here is this
Hmm.
can be, again, really tricky to talk about because at no point are we now trying to disparage the other parent, but um, trying to just emphasize that this is a very common thing where the kids are put in the middle, and rather than the parents supporting and being there as co-parents, even if they can't co-parent, but just focusing on maintaining that balance for the child's sake, because that's the most important thing is, okay,
Right.
you're way off over here in left field and living a life that I can't be a part of anymore. And I'm way over here and maybe we'll never even be able to meet in the middle anymore. But our child is still here in the middle and they still have half of each of our heart inside of them. So let's figure out boundaries and a way to make this work for their sake and not now degenerate into just trying to cut the other one out for our to satiate our own spite or um, need to protect ourselves from the other parent. There's always a way, I think, maybe not always is too general, but in most situations, a way to make it work, even if the parents cannot communicate with each other.
Right. There's gotta be a way. There's gotta be a way that between whether it be court appointed or with therapists or social worker or someone somehow to be more proactive about this so this doesn't continue to happen to our youth, and other parents.
Right.
I mean, there's just so much, there's so much hurt out in the world, and one thing that I've learned by being in therapy myself, hurting people hurt one another. And
Exactly.
and that's an indicator something's wrong.
Right. Um, and also, when you cut down the other parent or tell the child that they're so bad you can't be with them anymore, you are telling the child that that part of their heart is broken as well. So then they're left trying to rationalize and figure that out.
Divorce and with children or without children is hard in itself. But with children, it's that much harder. Um, you're going to be tied to that other parent for the rest of your life, even though you're no longer married. Because even once the child becomes 18 and an adult, you got to remember there's going to be weddings, there's going to be grandchildren, there's going to be doings, and there's still a connection there, like it or not.
For life.
Exactly.
I think that's a good point to bring in hope. Um, Now, first of all, a warning there is um, hopefully a parent would not want to prolong this battle for the child's entire life because the child is going to be an adult and they're going to be able to more and more make their own decisions. And so that's one thing I think is important is if you're constantly driving a child into a wedge, um, eventually they're going to figure it out. Kids aren't dumb. Um, it might take some time, but they're going to gravitate towards the parent that is emphasizing love and balance, and at least that's the hope, and being able to stop the cycle for their own kids' sake. And also, I think um, that would be a good area to focus on with parents who I know it's an area that I tried to emphasize responding to children and especially parents in crisis who are dealing with this is just a chapter. And I know it might be hard to accept the lost memories that you've had up until now, but there's a lot of life left. And there are many, many important milestones to come up and many more important memories that can still be made. Life is long. And so trying to focus on just staying in the story so that those better, brighter chapters can be written.
Right. Sometimes that's all we have.
It's really hard,
Hold
though.
up. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was a YouTube video or something I had found at one point, and I don't know if I sent you that. I maybe didn't. But it was a grown-up child that had done this like documentary of reconnecting with, I think it was her father that she was alienated from.
Mm.
And this is not a new thing. It's been going on for decades, because I think this video was from the 80s or 90s. But she came to her own conclusions when she sought out her biological father after years of being alienated. It was quite moving.
You had talked once about, some of the fear that might keep a child trapped when maybe they even can kind of see the truth of the situation in real time.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I don't know if, Stockholm syndrome would be the right
It's some
connection.
form of something like that, because I mean they're it's like they desperately want that the alienating parents' approval and love, so they will do whatever it takes to get that,
Right. Well, and I
even
think
if that.
part of it too might be, if one parent is knocked out and they're no longer there, well, then that cuts the child's situation down to the alienating parent, and just the fear. So there's already been a destabilization, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then the fear of further destabilization and what could happen there. Could I lose both of my parents, kind of a thing?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's worrisome when you think about how many different ways a mind could fracture
Right.
before it's fully developed.
Right. All of the disorder that can come up either from trying to make it make sense and rationalize the feelings inside, and maybe feeling the truth of the situation, but also hearing all of the manipulation and feeling the effects of the alienation. That's just, when you're trying to deal with that on top of just being in high school, or just trying to grow and develop and live your life. I can't even imagine, because thankfully I was not forced into that situation growing up.
Likewise, things weren't always great, but at least they didn't have that.
And maybe that's another important point too, is when you're seeing behavior in your child that is very hurtful, being able to see through that for what it is, like you said earlier, that's so true, is hurt people, and realizing they didn't ask to be put in that situation. It is an almost impossible situation to navigate through, I think, as a child.
Yeah.
And to not take that personally as the other parent.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Taking the long road and trying to rise above, that takes a ton of acceptance, though, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like another catch-22 is like, are you really supposed to accept it? Like,
Right.
where do you draw the line of like, okay, well, I just need to, this is just the way it is, and I just have to give time when you've already lost time.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you're a faithful parent and a caring, loving parent, then to be a good, caring, loving parent, I even thought about this as you were talking, is like movies like Taken, where so it glorifies a dad whose child was kidnapped doing everything in his power to get his child back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a situation where a child is kidnapped, we praise parents who, and we elevate that. That's a virtue of fighting for your child no matter what. And yet every day it happens in plain sight through divorce court, or in these situations where one parent is trying to alienate their children from the other parent. And
Absolutely. That's a very good analogy.
uh,
Yeah. And it's, yeah.
so it can, I mean, I imagine it would be very, very difficult to just lay down and take the long-term approach, and questioning if that is even the right approach.
In my case, it was, you know, I ended up giving him what he wanted. I just stopped fighting. I stopped all the court stuff. One, I couldn't afford it. Two, things weren't going my way. And three, I was like in constant prayer, and she did come around a little bit on her own, and then more and more and more. Um, so I'm grateful every day for that. I lost a good year. And that was one of the hardest years of my life. And that's, and a lot happens in a year.
Oh yeah, especially in high school. I mean, every year seems like a lifetime.
Right, right. But there are some parents that lose years, and I can't imagine what that would be like. Sorry, I'm getting emotional because it's heartbreaking.
You hear a lot of stories about people demonizing parents that have given up. But I think maybe an important thing for any, especially child who might be going through something like this, where they've heard stories about the other parent without ever actually having long conversations with that parent, to remember that there's two sides to every story, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe don't just ride with the one that you've been told by one parent the whole time, and to really give grace, and to seek out that other parent if you can, to try and get the true story if possible, and make a determination for yourself. And also realizing, like, all the effects that we're talking about that come from being separated from your child because you love them, to give grace there, like we were just talking about, as a parent giving grace to your child, and maybe some of the symptoms or behaviors that are manifesting themselves through them because of the situation, but then vice versa for an adult child who's either looking back, or a dependent child who's going through it, to give some grace to the parent. And that, I think, is an important point just in general. We are all children of God, and we're all trying to find our way through this broken world, and it can get really dark at times. And in the same way that we're kind of preaching on, don't let that hurt then spill over and hurt other people. Uh,
Right.
yeah, that's the main point of, and all things can be made new. Um, you can even if things have been bad or abusive,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story, and that it should be.
And good can always come out of it.
Right.
There's always lessons to be learned, and eyes to be opened. It's there's always a silver lining somewhere.
Make beauty even out of the darkest times. And I would argue that I was just talking about this the other day of like, I think that's one of the definitions of love is like, there are going to be those broken periods of time. But the beauty is that you can then see the resilience and working through that. And that is a good time to model commitment. And, the whole purpose of a family is to help each other to share in the joys, but also especially to share in the struggles. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I liked a couple of the points of emphasis of ways to improve. So many more resources could be pumped into, and I would say should be pumped into, which should be considered family court, and trying to preserve the family unit at all costs, even if the mom and dad aren't together, and giving resources to, if we're going to have attorneys representing, and that's just the way it is, then giving
Mm-hmm.
resources to a parent who is financially not able to afford their own attorney, like happens in criminal court.
Yep.
And if assessments are going to be ordered, then some type of program so that the one parent is just on the hook for that, and maybe even ways to support the non-custodial parent and not just the parent who has placement of the children.
Right. Yeah, there needs to be some changes made, because I mean, there's too much, there's more wrong than right, I think, about the system itself. It's very broken.
Right.
And that is not in the best interest of any child.
Right.
When the system itself is broken, that is set in place, that is supposed to help and protect them.
Well, and again, generationally, it's a never-ending cycle, right? Because then those children who've been broken by the system and had it fail to keep balance in their lives, well, then that has all of they grow up with that, the natural disorder that comes from that.
Right.
And
The cycle repeats.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And arguably just keeps getting worse and worse and worse.
Correct.
Well, I can't think of anywhere else to go from there.
We covered a lot of territory.
Yeah. And it's a conversation that could be had over and over and over again. But again, I guess I want to emphasize that it's such a touchy conversation to have, because you want to protect the children from any further harm. But it also seems weird because, like, how do we ever fix anything if the conversation never takes place from people who've lived it,
Right.
It's so tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe end on just focusing with, again, our Heavenly Father can make all things new, and children do have a piece of both of their parents in their hearts, and anything we can heal through anything by God's grace. And so let us always put our hope in Him and try to forgive and build each other up, even if it's a former partner that we don't agree with anymore, to still realize that that is still mommy or daddy to our child, and they still have a part of them in their heart. And for a child to remember that parents were once children, and they have their own bag of, their own baggage that they're trying to heal from their childhood, and also emphasize forgiveness there, and trying to have those tough conversations and try to reconnect as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
All right.